Hey everyone, we're back with another video around how can we cultivate the personal rhythm of abiding in Christ. And today what I want to do is take a little bit of time to talk to you about the spiritual discipline of Sabbath. John Mark Comer, in his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, he wrote, "When the sun set our rhythms of work and rest, it did so under the control of God. But the clock is under the control of the employer, who is a far more demanding master." Right? So essentially he's saying in that statement, the clock fundamentally changed our relationship to time. Now, I don't think that is inherently bad, but it did serve as this add-on to the God-given natural flow of time. Now, fast forward to today, and we are constantly seeing new technology hitting the market, promising us more time and less work. And whether it's our phones or it's the latest app to hit the App Store, we're finding time-saving innovations coming onto our doorstep. But the reality of it is, these things have historically decreased leisure and increased demands. Research shows that we're now working more hours and having longer work weeks than we did 40 years ago. As we steadily go against the grain of how God has ordered our world, it is not without consequence. As one philosopher wisely said, if you go against the grain of the universe, you get splinters. And I think some of us, we have plenty of splinters, don't we? There's one Harvard study that revealed the links between smartphone usage and increased levels of anxiety, depression, poor sleep quality, and increased risk of car injury and even death. So that's not great, right? So it seems like instead of managing our time, we've become enslaved to it. So let me just ask you to consider this. What if the solution to your life isn't chasing after the next thing that helps you do more? What if it's actually doing less? In the book of Genesis, God pronounces this blessing over humanity. This is a blessing that declares work as a sacred part of creation from the very beginning. Right? So human beings are uniquely tasked, as one rabbi said, in partnering with God in taking the world somewhere. So in Genesis, we see a God who is at work ordering creation, and that same God calls us to work as well, partnering with him in the good work that he's doing. But the narrative tells us that God only worked for 6 days. And on the seventh day, God doesn't work. God doesn't create anything. God rests. Listen to Genesis 2, starting in the beginning of the chapter. "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all of his work that he had done." Okay, so what we see in that text is that God not only creates the world and the natural flow of time that it operates from, but God in his grace and in his mercy, he actually models for us how to live in it, even though he exists independently of it. So as we talk about Sabbath, there's this twofold nature to this day of rest. One is passive and one is active. One is not doing something, and the other is engaging in intentional and purposeful activity that breathes life back into your soul. So the Sabbath is a day where we refrain from work, but it's also a day where we rejoice. It's a day where we cease from the day-to-day activity that we do, but it's also a day where we carve out purposeful time to celebrate and experience and delight in the good and beautiful things in God's world. So I want you to imagine for a moment, what would your life be like if every 7 days you set aside all the things that cause you agitation and anxiety, and you intentionally participate only in that which fills your spirit? What would that do for you? What would that do for your relationships? What would that do for your family? So the question is, do you have a Sabbath? And by Sabbath, I don't just mean a day off, because, okay, I have a day off too, and let's be honest. Your day off is where you do all the work you don't get paid for, right? You're going to the bank, you're working on that remodeling project, you're paying your bills, you're watching your kids. That's not Sabbath. I'm asking you something different. Do you have a day, a space in your schedule, every 7 days to simply delight in your Creator, the life that He's given you, and the world that He's placed you in? Because this is an important day. Listen to verse 3 of Genesis 2. It reads, "So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all His work that He had done in creation." So God sets apart this day as something sacred, something distinct, something different, because it's something God models and God commands for us for our good. The Sabbath is a grace from God. It's a spiritual delivery system that actually breathes life back into us. And now, if you're asking yourself this question of, okay, Sabbath sounds great, but what counts as work and what doesn't count as work? Okay, here's the question that I'll ask you to consider. Run any potential Sabbath activity through this simple question. Does it count as rest or worship? And if the answer is no, it's not rest or worship, or you're just not sure, you have the other 6 days to do it. Right? My goal here is not to give you a Sabbath formula or a checklist. The thing is this: Sabbath is going to look different for you depending on the stage of life that you're in. It's going to look different for a young couple in their 20s or 30s than it does for empty nesters that are nearing retirement. What I find interesting about the Sabbath is that it's the only command that actually has a why attached to it. When God gives Moses the 10 Commandments, right? God doesn't say, don't murder, and here's why you shouldn't murder. He doesn't say, don't commit adultery, and here's why you shouldn't commit adultery. But with the Sabbath, God says, hey, this is the why. And He actually calls the Israelites back to Genesis 2, where God Himself models these unforced, unhurried rhythms of grace for you and for me. There was a survey done that found a group of Christians who faithfully observed the Sabbath. It was a medical study, and doctors noted that these individuals lived 10 years longer than the average person. Okay, do the math. Every 7 days adds up to roughly 10 years over the course of a lifetime. So when God said, keep the Sabbath, and when Jesus in His earthly ministry said the Sabbath was made for man, He meant it. Every day you practice this, you are getting life breathed back into you. And you know what else is true? It also allows for a better you the other 6 days of the week when you're working. So 2 questions. Do you have a Sabbath? And if you don't have a Sabbath, I want to challenge you to consider, what do I need to do? What do I need to adjust? Perhaps what do I need to remove from my schedule in order to make space to be obedient to God and to do what He calls me to do this thing that actually breathes life back into me. And as you gather together with your groups next, I want you to talk about that. What would you need to do to make sure that you preserve this day of your week every 7 days? And how can you help one another even in making that happen?